it again.
Okay, good afternoon and welcome back to the Township of Woolwich Special Council meeting. Someone's got their sound on, okay. The Woolwich Special Council budget meeting on January 25th, 2024. We welcome everyone attending or watching via YouTube. Council had a capital budget session this morning and will be beginning the question period and deliberations this afternoon. As we ended this morning in closed session, we need to pass a resolution to reconvene in open session so we can get back to the budget. A motion to reconvene in open, Councillor Bryant, Councillor Burgess, all those in favor, and that's carried. So before we get into deliberations, are there any outstanding items or questions that you want to ask before we get into the meat and potatoes? No? Okay, well, I think Richard used to keep track of where we go and what outstanding items there are. So I think between Stephen and Ray, we're gonna be able to, if you wonder where we're at or what we've agreed on, they can help to identify those things for us. I don't have any particular agenda to start off. Councillor Cadell.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, I think that if I can, would it be possible? I know that I've sent some correspondence to Interim Director Fairweather just around comparable rates of taxation. I know that you had responded to that email. Do you want to speak to that a little? I mean, I can certainly speak to it, but it'd probably be better coming from you.
However the council wishes, I can speak to it, or you can, whatever you prefer.
If you don't mind, I would just appreciate that.
Let me find the file here. Sure. You want me to share my screen?
I think Tanya's gonna do that, right?
Okay.
Okay, it's up there
Okay.
for you.
This was a spreadsheet that I sent out yesterday to council when they asked for a comparison of the tax rates to the three townships. So again, the township average assessed value is 418,000. In 2023, I've noted here the Wellesley, Wilmot, and North Dumfries tax rates and what they roughly generate in revenue on an average assessed value is for each of them is in the second column there, 1,473 for Wellesley, 1,199 for Wilmot, and 1,126 for North Dumfries. And I've shown what Woolwich raises as 1,069. And then the question was, what if we increased the township's rates to equal the other municipalities? So if you do that and you apply that to Wellesley, Wilmot, and North Dumfries, the third column there shows that if you went to Wellesley's rate, it'd be an additional $403. If you went to North Dumfries, it'd be to Wilmot, it'd be $130, and for North Dumfries, $57. And then if you look at what that would have meant above and beyond what had already been approved by council as the increase in 2023, it would have required an additional 37.76% on top of what was approved, 12.19, or 5.35 to get the rates in Woolwich equal to those three townships. And then I was asked, okay, what happens going forward? So I then took the 2024 down below there, and you'll see that we've assumed, based on the information that's available, Wellesley is looking at a tax rate increase somewhere between 3.5% and 8.5%. And so we've used 3.5% increase in the rates for that one, which brings the tax rate up to 0.36 for the residential. Wilmot is a 10% increase is what's available. So theirs would go to 31.57, and North Dumfries, we weren't able to obtain any information on where they sit in relation to 2024. So we've assumed the tax rate increase would equal 2023, which is 5%. And then Woolwich is at 8.7%, and that gives you the three rates. And then if we look at, again, the average house assessed at 418, Woolwich is going to generate about $1,162. North Dumfries, $1,182. Wilmot, $1,319, and Wellesley, $1,524. And if you look at the increase there, they asked us, what is that projected increase for each of those townships? Your Wellesley is looking at about a $52 increase, Wilmot about $120, and North Dumfries about $56, and Woolwich is at 93. So if we were, again, to look at taking above and beyond the 23 increase and this above the 24, there'd be room of $362 to move to Wellesley's, $156 for Wilmot, and $20 for North Dumfries. So looking at those rates, it's about a 31% difference, 13.5 or 1.76, and we're at 8.7. Down below there, I've tried to show that given where we're at, what would be the increase of additional revenue that would be generated through taxation if we move to each of those after assessment growth. So if we went to what Wellesley is at, it would generate about 6.2 million. And for Wilmot, about 3.4, and North Dumfries about 1.5. And currently we're to get to the 8.7 for Woolwich, it'd be 1.2 million. So if you look at what that is, so right now we're at 8.7 to go from what 2023 is, add assessment growth and the difference. So to move up to Wellesley, we'd be looking at about a 43.5% increase to go from 2023 to Wellesley's rate. To go to Wilmot's about a 23.8% increase, and to go to North Dumfries about a 10.7. So that's what was in the information that was circulated yesterday to members of council.
Councillor Kiddo.
Thanks. And just for terms of comparison, I really appreciate you kind of walking us through all of those steps. Would you say that this is a fair apples to apples comparison to some of these other jurisdictions? I know one of the concerns is, well, the housing here might be slightly different. And so can you really have an apples to apples comparison using this data?
Through the mayor, in response to that question, the average house value within the region of Waterloo is at 418,000. So all of the area municipalities within Waterloo region agreed to use 418. Is that the same house that you would get in each of these other jurisdictions? It may not be. A $418,000 house in Woolwich may be entirely different than in Cambridge, Kitchener, Waterloo. It's an approximation. So based on assessed value, it's a fair comparison. Based on house and what that buys, it varies. Even within Woolwich, I'm sure Breslow's entirely different value to some of the other areas within the region with its proximity to some of the closer cities. So it is an approximation. I did circulate the BMA study, which tries to bring that into line. And when you look at that, Woolwich is within the low end of the tax rates for comparable municipalities of the same size and population.
One more question. Based on...
Turn your mic on.
Thank you. One more question. Then based on this assessment that you provided with the council with, Woolwich would have to raise its taxes by 10.67% this year just to be tied for last place with North Dumfries. Is that correct?
Through the mayor. Yeah, that's under the assumption, because we don't have any information, that the tax rate increase within North Dumfries will be at 5%, which is what it was in 2023. Then your comment is correct.
Is it 10.7 in total or 10.7 on top of the 8.7?
The 10.7 is from going from 2023 to that number in 2024. So it would be 10.7.
Okay.
So it's about another 2% or so above where you're at right now.
I lied. I'll ask one more question. If we want to go with actuals, could we look at 2023 and say we would have had to increase taxes by an additional, sorry, I'm trying to find it. If you scroll up on the screen.
Sorry, in response to your question there, if you were going to go above what you approved in 2023, at that point, it would have been another 5.35% increase.
So confirmation, last year, if we were tied for last place in Waterloo region in the townships, we would have had to increase another 5.35 on top of the 8.6, or just to bring us up to the next bottom comparison.
That's correct, through the mayor.
And the $15 million beside North Dumfries, is that the additional taxes we would have received?
That's correct. So your levy in 2023 would have been 15,080,000 as opposed to the 14,314,000.
Thank you. Councillor Schwint.
Appreciate this information, bring in context. I also do believe there's probably 10 different ways to look at this to do comparisons, and snapshots in time comparing us to North Dumfries or us to Wellesley probably isn't fair when there's been a level of expectation of A, tax rate, but also B, services developed over time by our residents. So we've got to be careful trying to meet in other townships tax rate, just like we want to be careful when we're comparing wages, for example, and meeting that 50% level. It's a never-ending theme of increases, which we've got to be fair to ourselves, but most of all for me, it's getting appropriate value for the tax dollars we generate or take in.
Mr. Brennan.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, to council. I think one of the other reasons that, this discussion was generated was also with respect to, as we're going through the budget and we look at, to Councillor Schwint's point, the services that are offered, the programs that are offered, the infrastructure that exists and all of that. We are the largest municipality population-wise. We are also the largest in terms of our infrastructure, in terms of our facilities, parks, etc. And yet, the reality of that is that we've been able, maybe that's the wrong choice of words, but we've still been the lowest. And at what point, though, are you going to continue to be able to grow as a municipality with the population, with all the new young families, new businesses, etc., and still be able to continue to offer the same service levels, same program levels, same quality of infrastructure, etc.? Will there be a point where there's a tipping point? And I think that's also, pardon me, what we wanted to generate, in terms of a discussion is that the previous councils have discussed, all right, are we proud of having the lowest tax rate? What philosophically what does it actually mean? And is that the right place to be, considering all of the future demands we know we're going to have as a growing, thriving municipality, with expectations that will provide the best level of quality services, the best level of programs, the best level of infrastructure. I think that's, partly what the struggle is. And, if I was to say it this way, i.e. a picture is worth 1,000 words. If you were to envision that we are the largest municipality, largest township with the most demands, would you reasonably expect us to be, maybe the township with the highest tax rate as opposed to the lowest tax rate and something closer to the city? Now, again, I appreciate, to Councillor Swit's point, you can look at numbers and they can mean many different things. But sometimes the way as staff we've looked at things is, well, Wellesley and North Dumfries being smaller, yes, they have less in the way of assessment growth. But as we said at the last meeting, even with the amount of assessment growth we've had, we're still not generating millions of dollars. We're generating hundreds of thousands of dollars. And yet you can see from our operating, or more appropriately, our capital, we have demands going on in the future of the tens of millions of dollars. And that also is what differentiates us between the other municipalities. And senior staff would argue that gets us closer to what the demands are of some of the larger city centers. We don't have exactly apples to apples comparison, but if we were to place ourselves on a grid, so to speak, it would be, between the townships and the cities in terms of how we've grown in the last 15 to 20 years.
Councillor Bryant.
Thank you. Just a comment. I don't think the public looks at how we compare to other municipalities. I think the public just looks at what's my tax increase going to be? What is my bottom line? So I guess my question would be, if we look at what the region's increasing the taxes by, what our increase would be and what the school boards would be, what would be that total number for the $418,000 assessment? What are they looking at for the big number?
Through the mayor, that'd be about just a little over $144 a year.
That's it? I
That's
thought it
it.
was higher than that, because last year came in, I thought, close to 500, 400.
On an average home, I think the region's around $54, $55, and
Okay.
93, it gets you to the 144 and change.
Thank you.
The other piece to, or the other way to look at it is remembering that our portion of the property tax is 26 cents on the dollar. So when people are looking at their tax bill, for example, I think our portion is 1,600,
I thought
It's
it was-
just a little over 1,069 and 23.
1,069,
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So
Had the six in the wrong spot.
But I thought our portion for this year was $90, so that's why I'm questioning the 144, including the school board and the region. That's why I'm asking the question.
Okay. Well,
I do have the details, like I do have an email that came out from the treasurer of the region indicating Woolwich's share of the 2024 increase. And it's around the $54.
Okay, so
Range.
where did we get the $90 from then? Sorry, I'm getting confused here as to where we're getting our number.
The
because-
the $90 is a township share
Right,
to increase. And when you add the townships and the regions together,
right. And what about?
it comes out to 100. The school board's rates are frozen. They're not
Okay.
increasing. So there's no increase in the
Right,
school
but what's
levy.
the school board portion though, to give me that total number that they would pay in the tax increase?
so there is no tax
no
increase for
tax-
the school board is what he's saying, they're frozen.
So there's nothing for the school board for this year.
No increase, I think is what he just
Right,
said.
but there'll still be whatever was there from a normal.
Okay,
are they
so
running
you want
zero?
the total
I want the
tax bill,
total
total ta-
increase for a person.
So
with
there's
the-
no increase on the school part.
Okay, I'm just questioning. That's why I'm just trying to get a full
Yeah,
bottom line
yeah,
number.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, through the math, the total increase is just a little over $144 annually. Okay, including the region, the school boards and the townships.
With the average assessment.
What average assessment?
Okay. Just
Right.
wanted clarity on that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
No, that's good. The other thing that came to mind when David was talking, also, and I think this speaks to, good management at the township, and that is that our area is the largest area of any of the local municipalities, and I believe we can fit all three cities in the area of Woolwich Township. So we've got a lot of area to cover, and we've got a lot of rivers, which means a lot of bridges. Councillor Schwint.
So just looking at the budget and aggregate and the tax levy. I understand we look like we're falling behind other townships, but I don't think that we can set a bar that we're gonna catch up to them and say that's good governance by this council. I can see us a measured rate over the term of council and start of the next term of council to show increases over a 5 to 7 year period where we're catching up, not falling behind, but to try and jump up 10, 12, 15% this year doesn't pass the smell test for me. But having said that, I can live with an 8.7% increase in taxes, not liking it, but it's reality. I can't live with it at 8.7% and debenturing as much money as $11 million. Speak to your points before about debenturing, paving and road resurfacing doesn't work for me. My belief is we have to look at some cuts within the budget proposed, maintain the tax levy, increase at 8.7 to start building up some reserves and have money for capital going forward. So that's my starting position on where we should be looking.
Councillor Cadeau.
Thanks, Mayor. Through you. I agree that coming forth with an absorbent tax increase would be responsible for taxpayers who have grown accustomed to this, the rate that they, well, have been enjoying here in Woolwich. But I think that it's important to point out the contrast effect that if we're raising taxes on an already low baseline, it seems as if you're raising taxes that much more, like an 8.7% in Woolwich is going to be a 5% increase in another jurisdiction because of our already low baseline. So I don't really want to talk in terms of percentages as much as talk in terms of relative expenditures that we're making here. I think to me, that's what makes more sense. And I think we're getting too focused on percentage points and not really appreciating the contrast effect of that incredibly low baseline. And I'm looking at the municipal study, the BMA study that was shared. If we're looking at Woolwich's tax rate, and that includes the regional tax rate, I believe, we're at 0.837%. The provincial average is 1.16. So it's not just locally that we're low, it's provincially that we're low. And so this contrast effect is very real and we need to recognize it while still being responsible with how we are stewards of the money that we're collecting. So I'm with Councillor Schwint, in the debentures are really giving me cause for concern. That percentage point, not so concerning because of the contrast effect. We're going to have to look at these tax rates and we're going to have to increase them. These, previous councils that kept taxes significantly low in this township puts us at a competitive disadvantage moving forward because we just can't keep up with the infrastructure demands. That's what's resonating with me after hearing a lot of the deliberations, hearing a lot of the presentations. So I don't know.
So two pieces to what you were talking about, Councillor Schwint. I think during the capital discussion, we talked about should the sort of the paving and the road maintenance be part of the operating budget, and then have the debentures strictly for a hard asset that's new. And so are you suggesting that we would move those pieces into the operating budget and then look at how because I don't think you're suggesting we take those out of the budget completely.
I'm not suggesting take the paving, no, but maybe other capital asset or capital purchases we have to defer or take out in order to reduce our debentures. I was coming up with about 4.2 million in debentures that to me aren't debentures stuff. They're repairs and maintenance and ongoing operations that we should be paying for as we go. So to save 4.2 million, what can we cut to make those savings? I'm not suggesting reducing the levy because that money is required, but I'd like to find 4 million savings. And there's a few places I can start up, but I'm curious what other councillors say.
I'll chime in because I'm going through some of our capital forecasts and reading my notes. Deferred because there's no money, deferred because there's no money, deferred because there's no money. High priority, but chances are it could get deferred as well. What are we gonna cut? And if you do have ideas, I'm all ears because I'm struggling personally.
Councillor Schwartz.
Make me the bad guy, but that's okay. So quick ones for me. We talked about this to death last year, but the Peel Street Bridge dollars for benefit isn't working for me. Can we push a fire truck off a year? Asked a question this morning about our out of service time and how our trucks are standing up, and seems like our mechanics are doing a great job. There's a ways to extend the shelf life or operating life of fire trucks if we can gain a year that way. I'm still not sold on some of the personnel increases at the staff level. I know there's good cases in each individual one, but in aggregate, can we postpone 1 or 2 of those for years, for a year or two? That's where I'd be starting.
Through you, Mayor Shawns. I'll just point out some notes we received here as a council. Back when we originally talking budget, we had asked staff to come back to us at 4% as an option instead of the 6%. Without the extra levies. And the 3 options they came to us were reducing the amount of 100,000 going into reserves for fire, which when we're talking price of vehicles these days, I don't know if that's a great option there unless we're delaying some of the purchases. The other one was bringing in an extra $100,000 and dividend revenue from Innova, which again, that can be a conversation, but not something we can rely on going forward. And the last one they pointed out there was removing the 1% climate action levy. Which again, that's can be a farther discussion. It's something that we can cut, but can we meet our goals? So to me, the only possible one there would be the last one, the climate action, if that's something council wants to look into.
I think it's certainly something that we can consider, especially if this council isn't supportive of the climate change coordinator role. What's the point of raising all this money to sit in a bank account and not access? I think that we need that position to actually be that steward of those funds. So I'd be interested in council's position on that position.
Councillor Bryant.
I think we heard Annie say at one of our meetings not too long ago that we don't have the infrastructure or the money to support what they would have to do, that they could come back with recommendations, but we wouldn't have the dollars to follow through and complete those projects. So for me, I would think we could take that position out at this point in time. Unless we've got the dollars to support what they would be doing, I really question the value of that position.
I didn't hear, I heard what you said. I didn't remember hearing that.
Well, he was asking about the climate
From-
change, this position.
No, I understand what you said, but Ms. MacArthur, can you?
It was when they did the presentation to us.
Through you, Madam Chair, to council. So I think I would say there is funding in the reserve fund available to, I think we originally proposed in October to have a 3-year contract. And then there was still a remaining balance of $250,000 that would start to implement some of those programs. Is there enough for us to do all of the things that may come back in the feasibility study? No, it would have to be staged like any other, but there is enough, I think, to start making some headway in the next 3 years. That helps to clarify.
I'm quite comfortable with silence, just so you know. Councillor Bryant.
I was gonna follow up onto Evan's question from the 6% to the 4%. In order to go from 6 to 4, how many dollars would we have to trim from the budget? Down to a 4% budget. Right, take the levies out, just the straight budget part.
Okay, I'll work that out for you.
Okay,
It would be 280,000.
Yeah, if you,
Yeah.
if you're looking at, it's 143,000 roughly per 1%.
thank you. Just saves me working it out. That's what
Yeah, so it's about 286,000.
Thank you.
Evan, Council Burgess.
Through you, Mayor Shantz, to council. I'm just kind of repeating what's already been said here, but just going off Councillor Schwinn's points again on the infrastructure reserves, we're looking at 1.5%. Or sorry, the levy, but our reserves are dwindling and we're debenturing paving and everything's going up in cost. I almost think that 1.5 is not enough and like to see that higher, but I don't want to raise taxes higher. So I think maybe this is the year where we got to cut back on other situations, whether that be staff or some other projects. But to me, infrastructure is a core feature of the township that we can't be cutting, and the way our reserves are dwindling, I think that's something we really need to keep, and we need to look at other ways of bringing the levy down.
Councillor Cadeau.
Or maybe we consider not bringing the levy down and actually address the infrastructure deficit. That's, I guess, the other side of that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, could you expand on that one, please?
Well, if you want to try and address some of the things that you have going while trying to bring the taxes down as well, they may not coincide. You may actually have to raise taxes to address the infrastructure deficit. That's kind of what I was suggesting. So maybe we have to make that decision. Do we address infrastructure deficit? Or do we live debenturing the Band-Aid solutions to our infrastructure? Because I don't think we can do both and bring taxes down to the 4% range is kind of what I'm saying.
Sorry, were you ready? Okay, just sort of sometimes I see hands move out of the corner of my eye. Go ahead, Councillor Schwinn.
Okay, well, I'm on your page. Not lowering proposed tax rate, Councillor Cadeau, but to save some money and I guess balance our numbers better over time. In the fire department, I see a need for a fire truck a year. It's kind of on average. We've got 2 next year, none the year after, 2 the year after that. What if we want 1, which would help our cash flow needs and I think maintain the service that we expect. So that would be call it a 1.1 million savings by deferring a year, which would, that's 4% if I'm using the CAO's numbers, which can be put in the fire department reserve or the infrastructure reserve. I'm not saying take it out of the levy.
Sure, yeah. Mr. Fairweather, Director.
Through the mayor, the funding that you're looking at is the fire equipment is funded predominantly from the equipment reserve fund. So deferring it a year, yes, it'll help with the cash flow needs, but it doesn't alter anything to do with the budget other than you're kicking the fire truck out a year. It's now a 2-year window to order a new truck. So you're not just looking at, like, move it 1 year, you're now moving it out an additional year because it's your 2-year delivery. So if I order it in 24, I'm not really getting it till 26 potentially. So if I do it in 25, now I'm getting it in 27. So you've got to look at that. Will that fire truck be able to last 3 additional years from where it is today?
So are
On
we
that.
paying for that fire truck when we order it or when we
It-
take delivery?
It depends on through the mayor, it depends on the contract that's negotiated. Usually in the past, fire trucks, you put down a deposit once they secure the chassis to build it. And then there's payments throughout the build, but a majority of it is paid on delivery.
Chief?
Madam Mayor, currently, we don't pay for anything until we get delivery of the truck. So it's 2 years out or 3 years out, depending on what it is. But to Director of Finance's Director's comment that is changing with some manufacturers where you have to put down a deposit up front, but we haven't hit that yet, so.
So the suggestion that Councillor Schwint is making would not affect this year's budget? Can you, what page are you on?
Page 229, I'm just reading the note says funding required in 24. However, delivery would occur in 26.
Mr. Brenneman?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think what Mr. Fairweather is trying to say is, as we work through various ideas to maybe get down the levy, the tax rate, we should look at each of the particular projects or suggestions that you have and see whether there is an actual tax levy reduction. Or I think what Mr. Fairweather was trying to say is the eventual purchase of the truck would come from the equipment reserve. So by, eliminating that, you just push the project down the road, but you're not being able to shift those dollars into infrastructure.
So the equipment reserve is part of the operating budget every year is a contribution to the equipment reserve so that those costs are averaged out.
But deferring a year still allows us one more year to build up that reserve in theory. We're deferring the expenditure by a year. We do that in perpetuity, we save $1 million.
Sort of. Councillor Grant.
Thank you. Through you to the rest of council, I would have to agree with both Councillor Cadeau and Councillor Schwint that I'm not comfortable with reducing down to 4. I think the 8.7 is at the very minimum reasonable for what we are trying to achieve within the township. Likewise, I'm quite worried about the state of our infrastructure and the amount of debenture we're taking. So I would maybe start looking at some of those debenture projects specifically that we might want to either not do or move forward or cancel right out.
Sorry, Jared, I can't see your hand if you put it up because you're right behind Director Fairweather. So
That's
you
okay.
have to
I
wave
didn't
it
put it
high.
up. I didn't put it up, so that's okay.
Okay.
But I guess, apologize to jump in. If what I'm hearing from at least 3 of the councillors, that if we held the proposed rate of 8.7, which is the base rate of 6%, what is contained in certainly in the IS department's capital program is future levy costs tied up into debentures, right? So that's carrying costs. Obviously, will have significant impacts in future years, not necessarily this year, but future carrying costs will be fairly expensive. So in an effort to look to reduce or potentially even eliminate, I think what we would need to do, and I don't think we want to, at this very juncture this afternoon, identify exactly what programs, but I think I want to paint a bit of a picture for consideration, and that what staff can do is come back something that's more hard on what we can do. But I think I can paint a bit of a picture for council's benefit here. So in the Capital Bridge program, we're showing a proposed $3.95 million debenture. If we assumed to not do the Peel Street Bridge at the tune of 2.91, there's about $325,000 remaining in there that we could also forego and not debenture. Council has already approved the $720,000 for the Greenhouse Road Bridge that was tendered last year. So that would save significant debenture money there, and about the tune of about $3.2 million in savings of debenture. Now, it's still, we're obviously kicking things down the road, but we are saving that debenture occurring now. And we could wait, there's options there with Peel that we could explore later. The 325 was not allocated anything to specifically other than to support everything there. So if that were the case, the only programming that would occur in the Capital Bridge program would be Greenhouse Road previously approved, Floridale Road occurring, and then I would still advocate that we would want to look to do Oriole Parkway. We're still deficient to the tune of about $163,000. However, if we go to the Capital Bridge program, there's about 1.745 million shown. We could forego that. That means obviously that Side Road 16 and Mary Hill Road would not be completed. Spitzig Road is funded, and I would, and again, I don't hold us here, but I think what we could potentially do is forego Spitzig. That would allow $850,000 to be reallocated, which we could in turn potentially do to either fund road conversion. We could look to fund the additional Oriole, potentially even reallocated into the Capital Bridge for doing the study required for the low-level bridge. So I think there's some flexibility in doing that by essentially not doing the hot mix paving program and reallocating that $850,000. So that would eliminate two significant debentures, give some money to be reallocated, and that's just a thought process. But there is a way to potentially eliminate some of the significant debentures that we're looking at this year.
I think that the hot mix and the sort of maintenance pieces are parts that should be done, that I think at least Councillor Schwint was saying should be done. Councillor Bird, I'll let Evan go for Councillor Burgess and then Councillor Bryant.
Not to bring up a controversial topic again, but Director Poupet just brought it up, and one of the main things, aside from Spitzig Road, you said we could look at saving some money would be the Peel Street Bridge. I don't know if council wants to talk about the future on that to save up to 3 million, I think it was, close to, as a way to save on current debenture and long-term financing of that.
Just a question on Spitzig Road. If we let that go, is it going to keep deteriorating? Because I know it's tar and chip, or I'm not sure what the proper surface on it is now, but I know it is starting to break down.
Yeah, so I think we could forego a year. I think that's the other message would be whatever we don't do this year, we're showing what needs to be done. If we don't do it this year, we're not saying we're not going to do it. We need to show it next year. So I think that's the other piece to understand, that it will be back again next year. So I think you've got a bit of a window here with Spitzig, and this isn't the conversion portion of Spitzig. This is the hot mix portion that was outstanding. So, you know, it could sit a year. I wouldn't be overly concerned about that, but we're not suggesting we wouldn't do it. You would see this back at next year's budget.
Thank you.
Councillor Grant.
Through you to Jared. Earlier you mentioned that the Peel Street Bridge is still rehabilitable. I'm just wondering how much time do we have essentially before that bridge is at the state of Middlebrook? I know you also mentioned netting. When exactly would we maybe be seeing that? Just so we have an idea of how much of the up against the clock we're running.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Shantz, to Councillor Grant. That's a difficult question. We are inspecting it annually. We could we could do that maybe twice a year to get a better handle on what that deterioration is, you know, how that's occurring. We have been informed about the netting. We envision 2025 potentially could be the year we might want to look to net that. But again, it would all be what we see. So I think I would hazard to give a time frame on that. I think we just need to keep investigating that structure before, and we can report back to council at a later date this year with that information.
You had no one take you up, Councillor Burgess.
I will. I mean,
Councillor Cadell.
I know we had discussions about this last year at budget. I think it was Councillor Burgess that had originally brought up his concerns with it. You voted in favor of it when it went to vote. You know, you brought it up. Perhaps you can explain where you fall on that.
Yeah, now that we've been seeing our budget for 2 years here and seeing where the reserves are going and the large debentures we're taking on, I'm wondering if it is, well, given that we're just doing it as a pedestrian one and not even as a full vehicle bridge, if it is time just to let it go. I'm wondering council's opinion on that.
I'll probably,
Councillor Grant.
thank you, through you to this council, I'll probably be repeating maybe some of the same arguments I made in last year. But my feeling is that it's, once you remove a bridge, river crossing like that, it's much more difficult to put it back. I would still like to see that bridge rehabilitated. My opinions about it may be that it's less of a pedestrian bridge, but we look long-term at something that's more of a benefit to the community as well as the larger Woolwich as a whole, which is a vehicle crossing. And whether or not we start looking at funding down the road and putting aside money now to offset any debenture costs towards that full conversion.
So would you suggest you want to add that into the budget as additional infrastructure reserve, like, do you have any thoughts on that, or maybe you want to think about that? And yeah. Sure, Council Bryant.
Regarding the bridge, I think from a heritage perspective, if we were to designate it, and I know staff isn't gonna like that suggestion, but with it being designated, we probably have the potential to get some funding from the government. And I think maybe it's something we should be examining, because if there's external funding, then maybe that would help offset a large chunk of those costs. It's worth investigating, is something I'm suggesting. And that's something maybe the Heritage Committee can take a look at for us. And that's if staff would be willing to work with us on a designation for that bridge if it meant funding. Just my thoughts.
Okay.
If I could just tack on to that, then I would maybe not be looking to put anything into the reserve maybe this year for it. Instead of explore that route. And then with the caveat of next year, maybe we are having to reassess if heritage designation doesn't go through, that we start looking at increasing the infrastructure levy or to achieve that, with the idea that that would be going towards a full conversion of that bridge.
Councillor Burgess and then Councillor Cadeau.
Thank you, Mayor Sean, through you. Yeah, just if we do look to go through a vehicle bridge, I think it was more than double the cost, if I'm not mistaken, which would be very significant when we're already lacking funds. And on the funding side, Director Poupée can correct me, but I think we looked at multiple avenues to get government funding and heritage status. I don't think we were successful, or if you just want to elaborate on that, maybe that wasn't something we looked at.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Shantz, to sorry, to Councillor Burgess's question. Yeah, so I think at the time, our understanding was heritage grant funding was not significant dollars available for that support. I don't know at the time. I think there was KLG was here and presented, and it was around the $50,000 to $100,000 range, which isn't really sufficient to do that. And the other component on that is you need to be very specific on what you are identifying to be heritage value on the structure. And then that starts to handcuff what you can and can't do with the bridge as well. So I think the key piece from staff's vantage point is we respect the significance of those steel truss structures. And council seem to as well, which is important. And I think that alone is enough safety. And then it's just a matter of how we fund them. And I think that's exactly where we're at, where the rubber is meeting the road with needs and wants. And there doesn't seem to be enough dollars available for everything. So advocating for reserve funds for specific pieces of infrastructure, I think is a good idea from a staff's perspective, because then you know that money is allocated for that. So it just means putting some money in the bank for various things that we deem to be important, and then building up a bank so that when you do press play on a project, you have some money available or all the money available, and it does lessen the debenture impact, and it sort of gets you incrementally towards that end goal.
Can you remind us the difference approximate between a pedestrian bridge and a vehicle bridge? I know that was a couple of years ago we did that analysis.
Yeah, through Mayor Shantz to council. At the time, and again, very high level costing, depending on what that bridge is looking like. But a vehicular bridge could be around $5 million that would support all modes of traffic across that. The problem with this particular crossing, it's large. It's not a short crossing like Middlebrook is. It's a double span bridge, so that has cost impacts. But really, when you're looking to do a new bridge, you're going to do everything. You're going to get the sidewalks in, you're going to get the road in there for farm equipment, you're going to get horse and buggies across it, and the traveling public. Like, there is really no significant cost. And then it's how we going to respect the heritage significance? Do we use pieces of it? Do we build beside it? I mean, there's lots of things to explore in that realm, and you can go anywhere between 5 and I think at the time it was between 5 and 8, somewhere in there. Something certainly we could look to revisit again, but you would want to involve, obviously public engagement would be an important piece. But when you look at the grand scheme of things, it's not significantly different from converting this particular bridge to pedestrian only versus maybe something that can support multimodal modes of transportation at this location.
I think Councillor Cadeau was first and then Councillor Grant.
I appreciate where Councillor Grant was going with the multimodal forms of transportation. I think one of my main concerns was there's really no economic benefit for a pedestrian bridge here. I mean, we're not moving any goods. We're moving people like walking across the bridge. And so that was a little problematic. Now, if we were to go with, full vehicular traffic, I know that some of the concerns of residents would be increased truck traffic. As a resident of Elmira, I know how frustrating that can be. And I would hate to see our neighbors out in Winterbourne experience the same thing. So I guess my question is, if we went with full vehicular traffic, could we do a toll on heavy trucks or something to bring in some revenue, while at the same time try to minimize the heavy truck that would be using that river crossing?
Through you, Mayor Shantz, to Councillor Cadeau. Likely what we would impose is just a no truck route. With the gravel pit down the road, they have an access. I know that was concerned from the residents of Winterbourne and seeing a number of trucks using the gravel pit. So that's a defined route to Northfield Drive. We would look, to allow agricultural equipment, for example. But that would probably be more what we would do, is just impose a heavy truck prohibition on that stretch of road. And then it would allow emergency service vehicles, though. It would allow operations vehicles to traverse it. And of course, you'd allow your agricultural equipment. So I think you would get most of that kind of truck traffic off of there. And obviously we would have to turn to WRPS for some enforcement on that issue. But that's how we've done that in the past here in a number of streets anyway.
Councillor Grant.
Thank you. I think I may know the answer to this question, but I thought I'd just ask it anyways. Could we potentially build a pedestrian bridge that is able to be converted later to a vehicular bridge, so that we're splitting the cost of the full amount of a vehicle bridge? We're not building it all at one go. We're building maybe the pedestrian crossing, and then later we're adding on the vehicle.
To you, Mayor Shantz, Councillor Grant. I don't know that there would be any economic benefit to that. I think you would be looking to implement the ultimate solution there. Very different types of bridges, obviously. So there are pedestrian bridges that's what they're made for. They kind of drop in place. That's what would be envisioned, in a Middlebrook, for example. That's why you would remove that existing structure and you could just kind of place in a prefabricated type structure. But if you were looking to, I don't think there's any cost savings. I think you would do the full design and implement the full construction at one time whenever you saw fit.
I've sat through several debates on the Peel Street Bridge, and this is a good discussion, and it's helping to put our minds to where we need to go in the budget. I'm sensing that maybe we're not ready to move forward with the Peel Street Bridge at this point around the council table. Is that fair? And if that is true, then there's 2.9 million, I think, in this budget for debenture, which goes a long way to your concern, Councillor Schwint. And I would suggest, Mr. Poupey, that we may have to have a dedicated time to discuss the Peel Street Bridge again this year. Councillor Burgess.
Thank you. Through you, just to add to that, if I could, I think it would be good for council to make up our minds soon, just with dragging it out, it's costing more money. And then if we can do it before the netting cost of 100,000. So not that we need to decide today by any stretch, but just don't want to keep leaving it and pushing it, pushing it. I think we need to make that decision and move ahead sooner rather than later.
That's a good point. We've tried to do that a few times and it keeps coming back. So at some point we're going to land on something. Is that something that we can count on coming back in the second or third quarter.
Yeah.
Maybe the second quarter, so that we can have it in place before you start doing a lot of budget work.
Yeah, no, through you, Mayor Shantz, to council, I think that staff are more than open to having that discussion. There was that summary report that was provided for council's benefit for everybody to try to get up to speed on sort of all the history that's happened with Glasgow, Middlebrook, and our Peel Street Bridge. So yeah, I think that the legwork's been done from staff's vantage point, and it's just a matter of wrestling this to the ground now.
Maybe just put all the pieces together in one package and say, there you go, nighttime reading, including Middlebrook.
Yeah.
Fair. Yeah, we'll include Middlebrook with that, I guess. Yeah. I wasn't writing down names. Have I forgotten someone who was in line? No? Okay. Councillor Schwint.
I don't know, are we done on the capital side of things or when we're operating on the capital? I'm not quite. I just want to echo Mayor Shant's comments that deferring Spitzrig Road doesn't make sense to me. We're behind on our road upkeep anyway. And if staff have another project that's higher priority, by all means, but I don't want to take money out of our roads to save money this year. That's against one of my core beliefs. But I am quite willing to defer a fire truck for a year,
Fire truck.
so we can have one a year versus 2020.
This is the
Counselor-
legislative piece though, right? So we're legislated to maintain certain standards. And I would be the first to complain about this. In fact, I think on Tuesday I did, saying we're between a rock and a hard place between this legislation. Since that time, I've reflected on why do we have this legislation? And the fact we have this legislation is probably because there were some inquests into fires that had happened. Unfortunately, people probably lost their lives. And as a result, the province came in, made some regulations about what townships ought to do to make sure that something like this doesn't happen in the future. And so that's why we have regulations. And are they perfect? Of course not. But, you know, an inquest jury probably made a recommendation that was implemented by the province to try to prevent, you know, these types of tragedies from happening in the future. Probably because municipalities were leveraging their equipment maybe longer than they should have. So I respect the fact that legislation is in place to protect the citizens. At the same time, I appreciate the frustration in having to find money to pay for that, especially when it continues to go up. We're still between that rock and a hard place though, and there is an option for us. We can just not listen to the legislation, but that opens some risks as well.
The points on why the regulation there makes perfect sense to me, because someone didn't look and make sure they're in decent shape. I think we've done some due diligence. I'm confident our fire chief said this morning our equipment is not down for repairs. That tells me we're in good shape and can say, in this example, use of life, we can buy another year. Whereas there's some piece of equipment we may have to replace after 12 years instead of 20 because it was abused in a bad fire or some sort of thing. So I'm confident in this case, we can make an informed decision that we could do the deferral and overlook that.
Councillor Grant.
Thank you. Through you to the rest of council. I'm not comfortable with deferring the fire trucks because as we know, that cost is just gonna continue to increase and just be a necessity down the road. I am wondering, I'm not sure who's the best to direct this question to, but is there any, besides the legislation and the loss of life potential, is there any risk to our insurance coverage as well if we don't follow those legislative measures with our vehicle replacement?
Is that for Mr.
I don't know if Dennis can answer that or not.
Mr. Fairweather or Chief Aldis?
Through Madam Mayor to Councillor Grant, it does start to affect our insurance rating. The 20-year category right now puts us at the very end of keeping us in the best insurance rate we can get for the entire township. So if they extend out any further than that, it starts to affect the our residents' rates, especially in industrial and commercial properties. It starts to go up rather significantly, so.
Do you, I seem to recall one of the other terms of council, we actually stretched out our equipment. Was that fire or maybe that was, rec or infrastructure? Do you recall?
Madam Mayor, I know during COVID, that's why this current rescue is only getting replaced in 2024 and not in 2022 when it should have been done. And Conestoga's truck was the same way. They pushed it out a little bit to cushion the blow of the impact during COVID for taxes. So.
Councillor Burgess.
Through you, Mayor Shantz, to the chief. I'm not on the fire department, so I would defer to you on this because I don't want to take a risk with our equipment, basically, if it were down or something similar. But just wanted to get your thoughts on elaborating a bit on this legislation Councillor Cadeau's talking about, and also just on Councillor Schwind's comment on if we were to postpone a vehicle for a year, how that would affect you or what the outcomes would be.
Through Madam Mayor to Councillor Burgess. Our fleet is in good mechanical replace shape. They are getting old, parts are getting harder and harder to find. That's one of the big reasons. The aerial is a 1986 that we bought used. It's getting to the point where it's costing us more money to keep it well maintained than what we really should be spending. So that's why we kind of want to move that one forward. And plus, we have an opportunity to get a really good used truck locally without having to pay US dollars for something. Can we push some out? Possibly, but this one's already been pushed out. And like I'll reiterate, we went through today, we're actually looking at other alternatives to try and get that cost down. We want to try and, my firefighters realize, because they're taxpayers here as well, they want good quality equipment that works, but they don't want to buy something that isn't necessary as well. So we're looking at different avenues to try and break that down as far as we can. So.
Thank you. And is there any legislation, or can you expand on that and where it's from? And
through you, Councillor, through you, Mayor, to Councillor Burgess. So we use what's called a Section 21 guidance notes through the Ontario Health and Safety Act. And one of the guidance notes speaks to fire apparatus and maintenance, building and replacement. And in that guidance note, it's best practices. And one of the things it cites is in the Occupational Health and Safety Act, taking every reasonable precaution, which means following applicable guidance notes such as this one. But it also within that that guidance note, it references NFPA standards. So if you're not familiar with NFPA, it's the National Fire Protection Agency, and they set the standards for the fire service in North America and throughout the world. So all our accreditation and everything even for firefighters, our bunker gear, all the standards are produced through this organization. They set out basically what we're meant to do and industry best practices. And it references that in this guidance note, which is a provincial document and regulation. And it speaks to 20-year life and of fire trucks and their replacement after that time, because they're saying after that, the deterioration of the fire truck presents a health and safety risk to our firefighters, which then goes back to the every reasonable precaution. And to speak to the insurance end of that, insurance also is aware of the NFPA standard. So now they're saying, okay, well, we're going to follow the applicable standard that NFPA has set out. And after 20 years, we're going to derate your municipality if you don't comply. So as a rating for the municipality and our residents, that drops and their tax rate increases because now I guess the risk is greater of the fire truck failing. Does that answer your question?
yeah, no, that was good. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. No problem.
I do know that, or at least I think I have it right, that we have the highest or the best rating possible for our residents in terms of insurance rates, if you like.
Yes, Madam Mayor, that's correct. Because with our certified tanker shuttle, that gives even our our rural properties that don't have the hydrant coverage, if they're within 8 kilometers of one of our fire halls, they get the same class as if you lived in Elmira or St. Jacobs where it's fully hydrated. So
Just a little bit of a side note, I did get to watch a certification event that you had a number of years ago. It was really quite something to watch on a rural property with the big tanks and everything. Anyway, Councillor Grant and then Councillor Schwint.
Thank you. Through you to the rest of the council. Just a couple points. Replacing a vehicle with a used vehicle, I think, is a great cost saving measure. I think pushing that back a year would maybe lose that opportunity for us, which could put us in a year's time spending more money on a new vehicle. I think I keep hearing mention that we're just postponing it for a year, but we have to remember if we are buying new, it's not just postponing for a year, it's delivery 2 years later. So we're really pushing a vehicle out instead of just a year, but 3 years. So that's where my concern is there about deferring this cost now.
Councillor Schwint.
So I'm sold now on the need for the aerial. Makes sense to replace that one this year with the used. Seems like the right opportunity, but I see 2 rescue trucks there that I'm not hearing the need. It has to be this year, and one of them could be deferred and not affect our, I guess, our ability to provide the services we're looking for. Am I missing something else there? Because I see Conestoga and Elmira needs a rescue. That's not a pumper, that's not an aerial, that's I'm not sure.
Chief, you had talked about some ways to decrease those amounts as
yeah,
well.
but through Madam Mayor to Councillor Swint, Conestoga's was purchased in 2023 purchase. So it won't come off the book. We won't see payment of that until 2025. We are looking at cost savings in Elmira to try and take that cost and hopefully take it extremely down as far as we can. And it's the same with the aerial, but buying it used, we're hoping we can get it down a lot cheaper than that too. So that's, but I can't guarantee what the prices are going to be because that was a last minute kind of a ditched effort to see if we can get these deals done. So we won't know the pricing of that until sometime in 2020, well, this year yet.
So if you get a significant decrease in the price, then those funds would just stay in the reserve for future purchases. Correct?
I see a nod, so.
Councillor Cadeau.
I'm gonna go back to the question Councillor Burgess asked about the legislation, because we've been talking a lot about it. When it comes to the replacement schedule, and even on Tuesday, we talked a little bit about response rates and how that is even legislated. Is it legislation or is it guidelines? Because they're different. And I think that we need to be clear with what we're following. And I guess the second part of that question is, can you provide council with a copy of the legislation so that we can read it in its entirety and try to understand? Because I'm struggling with things like response rates and this timeline and how you can bump them out. And, you know, there are some risks to insurance and whatnot. But if you do a cost benefit analysis, perhaps it's in ratepayers' interest to pay a little bit more in insurance and a little bit less in taxes to have similar type coverage. So is it legislation that covers these things? Is it guidelines? Is it provincial legislation? Like, where is that maintained? Because if it's a North American body, presumably they're setting policy in the US, and is it as applicable here? So I'm just confused.
So I'd have to do some research into specific. Oh, sorry. I'm told I have to click my camera. Through your mayor to Councillor Cadeau. I'd have to do some research on the exact piece of legislation that would speak to that. Offhand, the piece of legislation that speaks to me the most is the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And in that it says for taking every precaution reasonable to protect the workers. And obviously, so the guidance note refers to that. So that right away would be one piece of legislation that the guidance note is yes, it's a guidance note, but it's also an industry best practice. So they're basically saying, you should follow this. You don't have to, but you absolutely should. And it goes back to the every reasonable caution. As for how the replacement of the fire truck is tied in with a specific piece of legislation outside of the Health and Safety Act, I'd have to do some research and get back to you, Counselor.
Can we also look at the response rates as well?
Response rates. So you're saying like the time required to get on scene?
Right.
Absolutely. I can put something together and hopefully answer your questions.
Sure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Brenneman?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, actually to either Dennis or Craig. I want to try to help here. I mean, I've sat around this table long enough to know, I think where Councillor Cadeau is going with this question is, what is the relevance of the NFPA standard? Where does that stand relative to, is that a piece of legislation? Is that a regulation? Who came up with that standard? And why is it so important that municipalities use that as a guidance? Because I think that's the root of what Councillor Cadeau is getting at, the NFPA standard. Many a fire chief have talked at budget time about the importance of that standard. So could staff address that?
Absolutely. CEO Brenneman, through you, Mayor, to Council. So the NFPA standard was adopted, I believe, and I could be wrong, but around 2015 in Ontario. Prior to that, it was the Ontario Fire Marshal who set the standard for firefighting in Ontario. And they adopted because that was the industry standard for firefighting in most of Canada, if not all, and United States, most of North America. And I can't reference other parts of the world, but I know it is an international standard that's accepted worldwide. And the significance of it is, again, it's industry best practice. So these are, there's an association of professionals throughout the industry that create these standards, and they're up for review every 5 years, and then they're published for fire departments to follow. And some are some are suggestions, some are actual standards, and it speaks, like I said, it speaks from everything to bunker gear construction and testing to fire truck replacement and construction. So features and things that need to be or should be, according to these professionals, in the build of whatever we do, as well as fire hose. They do sprinklers. So the building code, the Ontario building code, Ontario Fire Code references NFPA standards. So it is intertwined through our legislation in multiple aspects. And the Ontario Fire Marshal, which is the Solicitor General's office, has said this is what you're to follow as an organization residing in Ontario as a fire department. So like I said, I don't know the exact piece of legislation that speaks to converting from Ontario fire standards or Ontario firefighting standards, where the OFM switched in 2015 to NFPA. But like I said, I should be able to take it up and present you with the correlation of the two and why they're significant to one another.
Councillor Burgess. Councillor Schwint.
I don't want to beat this too much, but it's $1 million, so I may as well be informed. I know what an aerial truck does. I kind of understand what a pumper truck does. The rescue truck, it transports the equipment, it transports firefighters. Can you kind of walk through what functions all is entailed?
Through Madam Mayor to Councillor Schwint. So the rescue trucks respond to all our medical calls. They do carry equipment, they do carry personnel. Their command units at our fire scenes. That's like a lot of what their use is. It's something that we've just carried, like, yeah, it's just what we use it for. It's for rescue stuff, like mostly medical calls, like I said, incident command and helping to carry other equipment that we need.
Mr. Brenneman.
Again, though, to help counsel through you, Madam Mayor, Dennis, if memory serves me correctly, though, in the spirit of efficiency, a number of years ago, where fire departments would have rescues and pumpers, did we not make a move towards greater efficiency in terms of buying rescue pumpers? And that was, to make sure that we were also trying to save on the need for the number of trucks. And that resulted in some improvements overall from a fiscal standpoint.
Through Madam Mayor to do the CAO, it was pumper tankers that we were looking at.
Pumper tankers.
We did that to limit the amount of trucks that we were purchasing at the time. We were still buying rescues and pumpers and aerials, so.
Councillor Burgess.
I did have a question. Through you to the chief here, since we seem to be asking questions about every vehicle you guys are getting, I thought I'd jump in on the last one here. The Dodge pickup, 2015, although it is getting up there, it's not super old. And it's at 90K for a pickup. I know trucks are getting really expensive, but just wondering what you're getting there and the need and why the high cost and we can't get a better deal.
Through Madam Mayor to Councillor Burgess, just last year, we started to get get deal opportunities, but it's the cost of outfitting it for lights and caps is going up and up and up. So that's part of the problem with them is it's the truck we can still get. They're still really expensive, but we're getting a deal. It's getting all the other things added into it that we need that costs the extra little bit of money.
Thanks for the answer. That makes sense.
Mr. Brenneman.
Yeah, just to help to make sure that as staff, we may be tracking certain things that we need to work on between now and next week. Typical in the budget process, council makes certain asks at a meeting and we sometimes need a bit of time to come back. While there may be some debate around the 8.7, would I be correct that one of the things that we should work on and come back with, is the fact that all members of council don't seem to be comfortable, or a majority of members of council don't seem to be comfortable with us having to borrow for things like surface treatment and paving and things like that. And so you would be looking for us to come up with a list of potential areas where the levy dollars could be shifted, to allow for us not to have to debenture for those things. That seemed to be one of the, I understand this current debate, was still about, can we still put off dollars to keep the money in the equipment? But when you're really trying to shift levy dollars from one area to another, where we can do that, would I be correct that you seem to be most, if not unanimous, in terms of saying, can you come back as staff and say, if the principle of what council wants to achieve is, no, we don't want to borrow for those key fundamental operating infrastructure works. Can you come up and back with a list? I appreciate Councillor Schwint and others were starting down that road, but is that a work plan thing that we could come back with for the next meeting? Would that be helpful?
I heard it a little bit differently, but
Okay.
maybe I heard it wrong that that we weren't looking, although we don't like it in the capital budget, we weren't looking to move it into the levy this year, but to take other pieces out of the capital budget to offset it for this year, and then in subsequent years, make sure those maintenance pieces are part of the levy. But Councillor Schwint, I think you were sort of driving that one, so maybe I misunderstood.
Trying to get the distinction between the two stuff. One, I guess I'm not comfortable with the level of debt required to do all these projects. I'm looking at how can we reduce our costs, but maintain our repairs and maintenance, I'm gonna call it, on our infrastructure. So it's what capital things can we pull out or defer to reach that, starting with the capital. I think we've had a good conversation here. I'd be really curious if we threw back the fire department $700,000 for the second vehicle. Is that doable? But then we also should have a conversation, I think, on the operating side to achieve that same goal you were talking about, Mayor Shantz.
And are you looking for that to happen in this budget or next year's budget?
This year's budget.
So if we move those items that are road maintenance and like the paving and the not grading, but sorry. They have to happen.
Yeah.
But if we're asking staff to put that into the levy, that's, no,
No.
yeah.
So I guess what I was trying to follow along with Mr. Poupé's help was, I think he was trying to come up with projects. I thought, and maybe Jared can help me, I thought he was trying to come up with some projects, and not all of them seem to resonate, but where levy dollars could be, you know, if a certain capital project could be deferred for 1 year, taking levy dollars and making sure those levy dollars went into road conversion or surface treatment program and all of that. I guess that's what was resonating for me is that, and I get it, because trust me, at the senior management discussions, I said, we are the township of Woolwich, we are growing, we are thriving. Why are we needing to borrow for some of our core maintenance program needs, you know? And so what I was really understanding from what even Mr. Poupé and how he was trying to respond was, can we look at where we could maybe defer certain even capital projects? Because at the end of the day, it's where we use the levy dollars to bolster other parts of the budget. And I thought that's really what you want to accomplish this year, was bolstering things like, you know, paving, surface treatment, things like that are underfunded.
We're on the same page there. Reduce our overall spending in order to reduce our debenture costs this year.
Thanks. I don't disagree with the conversation, but I think that this atmosphere of low taxes that we've experienced has kind of put us in a position where we can't have everything. So if we don't want to debenture some of our infrastructure that we need to get to, we need to raise those funds. We can't just keep cutting stuff from an already pretty slim budget. We need to raise more money, and I don't know how else we can do that, but to raise it through the levy, unless we can come up with some sort of a user fee for our roads, which nobody's going to do. We need our roads to be dependable. And so we need to find the money somewhere. And if it's not through debentures, where is it through?
I thought we talked about items like the Peel Street Bridge. We don't spend that 2.9 million, that's 2.9 million in savings. In savings, if we don't do the project. It's not ventures, it's not spent. We're also gonna save money. We've got $100,000 on the building for the exterior. Is that something needed this year or not? It's a conversation. So it's more than, I think there's some stuff we just cancel, and it's also find savings, and it's also raise taxes.
I don't disagree with you. Fundamentally, I think there are things that we can take from that debenture list and defer or cancel completely, but our roads aren't one of those. So where do we find the money for that? Is through the levy. I think that needs to be placed on the levy, and I think it should be placed on it this year.
Okay, Councillor Bryant and then Councillor Burgess.
What's the cost of servicing that debenture? both the repayment and the interest rates, because that could be the savings I think that Eric is talking about. By not debenturing it, you're saving money that could be used for other areas.
So the 3 million-ish for the Peel Street Bridge?
Yeah, if you use that as an example, how much are we going to save through the interest and payment charges?
Director Fairweather?
Through the mayor, to borrow right now, if you borrow a 10-year debenture at 5%, it's running about 130,000 per million.
Well, 3 million,
So,
that's-
so 390 is 400,000.
Just for council's information, that's not built, the debt servicing costs are not built into the 2024 budget.
Oh, they're not in
No.
there? Okay. So that's a different
Because we,
issue then.
because we haven't.
Yeah,
done
we
it
haven't
yet.
borrowed the money. I was just curious what the service costs would be for that.
In the future budget year.
Yeah.
If we were to add it in,
Yeah.
that would be about another 3%. Evan, Councillor Burgess.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Shantz. Just going back to what you and CEO Brennan were saying about moving around the levy and the debt for paving. Just my opinion for this year, it doesn't really matter where it's coming from. I don't think debenture right now is the correct use of the funds for an ongoing maintenance. But because we're lacking in reserves, we're increasing our debenture and our levy for our general taxes all going up right now. I think the main thing is we just gotta find cost cutting measures in all the different areas. And it's not so much let's rejig what we're spending here or there this much. It's we just gotta find some savings in general. And if it means we keep it in as a debenture for this year, okay. Going forward, we should look at not doing it that way, but for this year, we just gotta find some savings.
I guess if I could put Councillor Cadeau on the spot, my apologies. So tax level, what number is high and what number is low? I'm trying to come around to 8.7%. I'm stomaching it. What's the ballpark that you were thinking?
Again, I find the percentage conversation problematic because of that contrast effect. When we already have a very low tax rate and we increase it by 8.5%, and then we have a Wellesley increase it by 8.5%, it's not equal, right? Our increase isn't going to be that much compared to the other location. So let's talk in relative terms. You know, what can the taxpayer actually absorb here to still keep Woolwich economically competitive with some of our other jurisdictions? Doesn't break their budget because they've come to expect a certain tax rate here in Woolwich, but is 8.7 on a 0.8% tax rate the right number? I don't know. And I think that that's the conversation that we're having here today is what expenses are, you know, most appropriate for a levy, which expenses are most appropriate for debentures, or which expenses should we just put on the shelf and not consider? And I think that we have to have that fulsome conversation, and whatever that percentage turns out to be, that's what the percentage turns out to be. I think that when we look at it comparatively to other jurisdictions, we're going to see the actual dollar amount rise in tandem with what we're seeing in other jurisdictions. So I'm not going to put a percentage on it. I don't think it's helpful at this point.
Councillor Grant.
Thank you. Through you to this council, I would agree with Councillor Burgess that when it comes to the debenture of the road surface treatment program, I think it's kind of baked in at this point, and we may not like the fact that we're debenturing it, but it might be something that we have to stomach this year with the caveat of next year. We look at those maintenance type programs as a levy cost, and it shouldn't be something that's debentured, but rather fully funded through the levy. But I'm not sure if this year it's helpful to say like, let's not debenture it.
I was gonna try to stretch in my mind and see if I could summarize anything, and I'm not sure. I think what I've heard around the table is we're not asking for a change to the 8.7% operating, but we're concerned about the rate of debenture and the amount of debenture that's happening. Staff has heard our discussion, Is this something that we just send back to staff and say, what do you suggest? Or shall we carry on here? Counselor Burgess.
Through you, Mayor Shantz, I guess to you too. Just clarity on what you said. I don't want to see it at 8.7%. So I'm not sure if that's what you're implying, but I want to lower the debentures in some of the projects, but I also would like to get the levy down. And I think that's a whole nother conversation we can get into now and later.
Okay, I think we
what-
need to have that
yeah.
conversation as well. So do you want to start?
Yeah, so just speaking to some residents, when they hear 8.7 or 8.5, what they would have heard back then, the first thing they ask is, how many people are you hiring? And when we say 5, I think it was 5, that's their big complaint. So I think that's something we really need to drill into is, do we need all 5? Which do we need? Which do we don't? What do we maybe save for next year? Not that we don't need them. Everyone made a really good case, but whether we want to go through them one by one or what council's opinion are on those, I think that needs to be a fuller conversation.
Counselor Bryant? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you had your hand up before. No, okay. Sure, go ahead.
I'll just, since we originally started this whole discussion at 1 or whenever it was on the climate 1%, I guess we can jump into the climate position. I know that probably won't affect the levy unless we're taking out the 1% if we don't hire the position. But yeah, I just want to get council's opinion on that. Although we do want to hit our goals of the 50 by 30 and 80 by 50, a lot of residents want to see us do that, and they want to, yeah, be an environmentally conscious township. When we're doing over 16% in 2 years, something needs to be done, and that's often what I hear is one thing is if they environmental stuff we want to get done, but we don't exactly know what's going to be done in that position and how it's going to play out. That this is one thing they'd like to see deferred till taxes are lower.
Counselor Cadeau.
Thanks, Mayor. Through you, I've been having conversations with residents and I've been hearing the opposite side of that coin. I've been hearing people, find this position to be one of the most important positions that we're considering, perhaps contentious, but one of the most important positions. And I'm of the opinion that this shouldn't be taken from the levy, or sorry, this shouldn't be taken from the climate levy. It should be added to our general levy. And I think that it should be added this year, especially if we're looking at a permanent position. So I feel completely different than Councillor Burgess on that one. See where this conversation goes.
I think to a point that you made earlier too, I mean, we're talking about percentage, but we're also talking absolute dollars. And I think we were talking $90 a year on an average assessment. That's less than $10 a month, just to put some perspective around that piece. Councillor Bryant, and then Councillor Burgess, and then Councillor Grant.
Thank you. I would agree with Councillor Burgess. I've been getting the same feedback from Breslau and Mary Hill and various communities. They do not want us to spend the money on a climate change person. They don't feel they can justify that position in their minds. They understand things need to be changed, but they don't feel we are going to be able to achieve those targets that have been put in place for the 80 by 50. I get those numbers confused, but you know the ones I'm talking about. Anyway, they don't feel those are achievable with what's been set out in the time frame. So I would say no to that position.
So they don't feel it's achievable with or without.
With or
a
without, they
position.
just don't feel that position warrants, they just can't justify that position in their minds.
Councillor Burgess, I think you were next, and then Councillor Grant.
Just on the tax increase, we often talk about it in dollars amount. It's $90 for our portion. I just don't like always when we talk about it like that, because we are only a quarter of it. So if we say that, the province says that for the school board and the region says that, then it's climbing a lot more, and we all have to do our portion. Yes, ours isn't just it's just $90, but it's again, only a quarter. So I think we all need to be responsible in how we spend our money. And on the climate portion, one concern I have, again, this is hypothetical, but if there's a change in federal government, if that'll affect a lot of the funding, and I know a big portion of what we want from the sustainability coordinator is to get us funding for climate action. And if there is an election in the next couple of years here, if that will change, and then what would we do at that point?
Councillor Grant and then Councillor Cadeau.
Thank you. Through you to this council. When I think of this climate position, when we say if you don't think 16% is doable in this year or the next year, the alternative is doing nothing, which also doesn't really get us to where we want to be. So I would really challenge that if we're voting no on this, that as part of our budget deliberations is reassessing those goals and saying, honestly, we're not going to reach them. But I think just saying no outright without having that very real accountable conversation is kind of a wasted effort. I am in full support of the climate position. I think it is a necessary one. I would agree that I would like to see it funded as a full-time position on the base levy, but I'm also willing to have it funded through the climate levy for a period of 2 to 3 years to see how it works out.
Okay, Councillor Cadeau.
Just reflecting on something Councillor Bryant said, I struggle with, knowing that we're not going to reach lofty targets, so let's not do anything. Like, I struggle with that. Sure, we do. And to Councillor Burgess's point, I agree that a change in government could significantly impact potential funding, but it's not going to significantly impact the fact that we are seeing changes to our climate. So I recognize the argument, but it's raining outside right now and all of our snow is going away. I mean, we don't have to look that far to see some of the effects. It is changing for better or for worse. And I think that having a position in place to meet that head on is fundamental for Woolwich in addressing some of these concerns. Are we going to meet our lofty targets? Maybe, maybe not. If we have this position in, are they going to help us? I certainly think so. Are we still going to reach that goals? Maybe not, but it's at least going to move the needle. It's at least going to push us in the right direction.
Councillor Grant.
I think thank you, through you to the rest of council. I think one of the other facets of this conversation we can have is if we're looking at reducing staff and staff have themselves identified the need for more staff, we need to look at the reality of their ability to do that side of desk work for climate change. And they've said time and time again, they're not able to do that work. So it would just be removing this position and knowing that no work is going to be continued to be done, or potentially adding a greater demand on our staff side to do that work. So there's that element too. It's not just the funding and how it's funded, but there's also the personnel cost to that as well, whether it's burnout, whether it's their ability to finish that work.
Councillor Schwint.
So up till now, I've been fundamentally opposed to hiring this position. And not because I don't believe in we should be doing the work. It's I believe that we won't spend that money effectively by hiring the person. So that's why I asked CAO Brenneman yesterday, how would we evaluate this person's job performance? And he did give the answer I guess I like, in that evaluate them on actions they achieve. We take that person, tell them to come up with new goals or tell us what we've achieved and not achieved, we're wasting the money. If we take that person and they come up with actual projects that make a difference for our residents, I can see that being good use of our money. That means attracting funds from the feds, from the province, whatever. So for 2 years, to hire a person, fund them from the climate fund, but evaluate them on achievements they make, and don't let them report to us on, oh, we're meeting our targets, 20 by 40, 40 by 80, whatever. We do that, I can support it because I do hear residents wanting us to do things. So in a short-term thing, it's a leap of faith for me, but I guess I'd go along with it. I do believe, I guess I disagree with staff. I think doing it department by department, I think could have been done, but we've consistently heard it's not doable. So I guess we'll go with staff's recommendation. Let's do the best we can. Be my vote.
Councillor Grant.
Just through you to the rest of council, one final point kind of to make about this position is we've had discussions about planning and specifically the future of Breslau and why we may not know how much down the road we're allowed to plan of that. I think this is a position that could be very helpful in directing that conversation for staff as well, for just future amenities that we'd like to put in there. So that's just another facet to put on that conversation as well.
Councillor Burgess and then Councillor Cadeau.
Through you, Mayor Shanta, Councillor Schwint there. Just clarity on your comment there. With this new position, are you supporting the 1% climate extra levy this year? And do you want the position full-time permanent upfront, where depending on how the results show, based on Mr. Brenneman's comments, or do you want it as a contract in the beginning to see if there is results?
I'm not getting what I want on this one, so, but direction, I believe we're gonna do it. Let's do this full speed ahead and hire the full-time position. If we make the position redundant in 2 years, we make the position redundant in 2 years. And if we're gonna do it, then we have to keep on going with the climate fund. Otherwise, why are we hiring the people we don't believe in it? So I guess I'm committed.
Councillor Cadeau. Oh,
Thanks,
sorry,
Mayor.
did
Through you to
have it?
council. Something that Councillor Swint said that resonated with me is I would really hate to see this position come on and spend money ineffectively. But I think the danger that we're faced with now is we continue to dedicate 1% to this climate change levy. And how are we spending that money? Are we spending that effectively? And I would argue we're spending it less effectively than we would if we had somebody to really steward this file forward.
Councillor Burgess.
I'm just gonna pick on Councillor Schwint one more time. Just again on that comment, so do you want it to both what Councillor Cadeau was saying too, we want to have the funds to be able to do these projects. So do you support right now taking the money from the reserve for 2 years, basically emptying it out or leaving about 50,000 in it to fund this position? Or do you want to raise our taxes to about 10% this year to put it on the general levy as been suggested?
Nope, I want to fund it out of the fund for 2 years. That fund will keep on growing, so gradually diminish because of the salary, but there's still are dollars left over. And part of the way I'll be evaluating this person's performance in 2 years is the amount of funds they brought in from other levels of government. It's up, if they don't pay for themselves, we can't sustain it.
So the fund itself won't diminish. Let's just be clear on that. If we add the 1%, Director Fairweather, can you, how much is going into the climate fund annually? Is it 140,000?
Through the mayor, currently the Climate Action Fund is sitting at the projected balance at the end of 2023 of 279,000.
Right.
And with the budget before you this year, you'll be contributing 363,143
This year.
this year. And then there's a utilization of about 196,000 projected in the budget.
So it will continue to grow. Councillor Burgess.
Last question I had that, you made the comment when you ended there that if they're not funding themselves, I don't think the purpose of it ever will be to find money to cover their costs. It would be more, we're gonna be able to do more green projects and fund those. It's not that we're getting money to cover them for existing projects.
If they're coordinating projects, there's normally some overhead built in those grant applications. And if they're bringing in $1 million in project funding, then township's paying 100,000 a year for salary, to me, that decent return on investment.
Anything else on the levy parts or the other positions or Councillor
I'll
Grant?
kick it off, so I won't make Councillor Burgess forge the way. Maybe what we'll do is I'd like to talk about the fire training position. This is a position I feel it should be funded this year. It was brought forward last year when we deferred it. I think staff have done their due diligence in trying to find alternative ways of funding that position, as well as kind of coming up with alternative plans for it. So at this point, I would be in support of the fire training, but I guess I'm just interested to see if the council is also on the same page.
Councillor Caduceus.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one, Councillor Grant. I think that last year we did defer that. We heard from the fire chief that they did approach all 4 of the townships in addition to the CAO. And I think the message from that table was very clear that Woolwich kind of needs to get its house in order before we can start to branch out with partnerships. I still think that this could be a wonderful revenue generating opportunity for us if we go through some of the pains, I'll call them, of getting that person up to speed full time. How can we start to reach out to some of the other townships and maybe even meet some of their needs with this new position? So yeah, I do support that one.
Councillor Bryant.
Thank you. I believe the fire chief mentioned that they would have to hire 2 bodies to cover the 4 townships. Was that correct, Dennis?
Chief.
Through Madam Mayor to Councillor Bryant, we would still have our full-time person we need here, and then it'd be a separate person that would look after coordinating everything for all the townships. Yes.
So we would pay for 1 full-time body and then the other full-time body would cover 4 townships. Is that what you're saying?
Through Madam Mayor. So it depends where that position sits. So that position could sit in Wilmot, Wellesley, North Dumfries. It's not necessarily that position would necessarily sit in-house with Woolwich. There's a possibility that it could, but it could be in one of those other municipalities as well, and we're just paying a quarter of their salary.
Okay, so we would still need 1 full-time for us and then the other would cover the 4 townships basically.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Schwint.
Yep, I guess I need more details in my mind on this one. This person will be putting on the courses or coordinating the courses for firefighters? I'm trying to decide, is this an administrative position or is this a firefighter position? If they're putting on the courses, do the cities have their own courses they put on individually? You talked about the fire college no longer being in existence. How are the cities, for example, putting on courses? Can we use their expertise?
Through Madam Mayor to Councillor Swint. With our joint training group that we have, it started off as just the 4 municipalities. We do have a partnership for some instructors for the city of Waterloo, and we're also doing other courses with other municipalities, like the cities as well. This person would help put all these courses on and be our instructor into those things, plus teach and coordinate all the training internally for the Township of Woolwich firefighters.
Councillor Caduceus.
So this training position would actually deliver some training. What would the cost of that training be if we had to send our volunteers outside of Woolwich?
Through Madam Mayor to Councillor Cadeau, to do our firefighter 1, firefighter 2 and hazmat training, we're looking at approximately, don't hold me to these numbers, to around $2,000 or more per firefighter. To send our candidates that are working on some other courses, like our officer courses and stuff. Depending on where it is, it's still around $375 to $500 a person, plus depending where it is, we may have to pay hotels and travel time, so.
So to bring that in-house then, could you hazard to guess, what it would be per person to do the same type of a training? If it's, 350, we'll say, to send out of house, what would it be?
Through Madam Mayor to Councillor Cadeau, we get charged, I think it's around $75 or $85 through the Ontario Fire Marshal to put on a course per person ourselves.
One more. If you weren't at full capacity with some of these courses, would you reach out to other townships and say, let's fill these spots and potentially bring in revenue that way?
Through Madam Mayor to Councillor Cadeau, that is a possibility. Right now, we're just filling most of ours up between the 4 townships because we're all at a deficient state of needing work. Going forward, yes. I think that's the model that Wellington County has now gone to. If there's open spaces, they send them out to all the neighboring municipalities and they can send people there to help cover the costs of running the courses.
I lied again. I'll ask one more question. So there could be a world then in 5 years from now where Woolwich has 2 full-time training officers. One is really dedicated to our staff, but one could potentially be delivering courses here in Woolwich, but we're drawing in the other townships and actually bringing in money along with that.
That is a possibility, yes.
What's next, folks?
I'll just go back to some of the cheaper capital asset conversations. To get away from the hirees for a sec. I know last year council voted against some of the vehicles that some of the departments requested. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I know last year Development Services asked for a hybrid and we said no. And they're asking again, are we in favor?
Counselor Bryant.
I think the discussion around that one last year was mileage versus the cost of the vehicle. And I think when it came back, mileage was going to be a much lower cost for us as a municipality than what buying the vehicle was going to be. Correct on that?
I don't recall. Does someone else have a better memory than I do?
Yeah, I thought when they gave us the numbers, the mileage was quite a bit lower than what the cost of replacing and putting that vehicle in place was going to be.
Yeah, from my recollection too, it was significantly cheaper and I remember specifically Counselor Schwint saying it's also better for the employee because they can make a few bucks off it.
Yeah, right. And plus, I believe the region usually only does mileage. I don't think they were bringing in vehicles. I believe Kayla had mentioned that last year, Counselor Grant.
I also recall the discussion being around, is this the one for the building inspector?
Yes.
And so some of the difficulties we've experienced attracting and maintaining candidates in this position. And so potentially having a vehicle could be one of those benefits to recruiting and retaining somebody. I think that that's kind of the position that staff had put forth, so.
Through you,
Counselor
Mayor,
Bridges.
Mayor Shawns. Just for clarity, I guess, to Director Freeze, would the vehicle be able to be sent home or are those usually just parked here and used just for official purposes?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So at this point, because we're only requesting one vehicle, it would likely have to be parked here. There could be arrangements if an employee had a visit or a site visit at the end of the day and they were going home and they come back the next day, but not on a consistent basis. In the future, if we were ever able to get to the point where all building officials had vehicles, then we would be looking at a different idea associated with that.
Counselor Schwint.
I'm just wondering if CAO could remind us, how many vacancies do we have in the organization currently?
I'd have to be honest, work with HR in terms of what that current stat is. In terms of like complete number of staff vacancies.
I guess, where I'm going with this is, we've got need for, say, 5 more people. Do we need 5 more people, or if we filled the 5 positions, say we're missing 5 are vacant? Would all of a sudden, is that a real problem? Is vacancies not short of staff complement? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I understand that question. No, I would respectfully suggest that our problem is, twofold. One is in some areas, the trends have shown it's been very difficult to recruit for certain positions. For example, in infrastructure services. With respect to these staffing asks, each and every year, senior management sits down and revises the 5-year forecast. At the end of the day, I can assure you that similar to what we're talking about in terms of a budget standpoint when it comes to staffing. We don't bring forward all of our needs in any one particular budget year because we understand the realities of what we're up against in terms of trying to keep the tax rate reasonable. But what we do in the end, bring forward, even then as part of the budget process, is the ones that we feel we critically need more from a staffing capacity issue in terms of being able to address you know, certain key realities. You know, and if, you know, if we go through, you know, if we go through the list, and I'm sure I'll miss one, but if we go through the list, you know, in simple terms, you've heard from a fire perspective, the key need there is with the government, you know, downloading certain key responsibilities with respect to mandatory certification and training. That requires certainly an increased amount of capacity and workload. With respect to Ms. Fries, on behalf of Development Services, more specifically Development Engineering, you heard from both her and Mr. Poupé. You can, you know, you can certainly see the benefits in us having a proper staff capacity to make sure the infrastructure that's going in the ground that we eventually assume Mr. Poupé's staff don't actually have to fix 5 to 10 years down the road because we weren't able to have the capacity to inspect properly. And therefore, what happens over 5 to 10 years or even 15 years is increases in costs. And we don't want to do that. You know, with respect to the manager of bylaw enforcement situation, you would have heard from Mr. Smith that we feel that there is some really important work that needs to be done in the area of AMPS implementation. If council wants to implement that key project very quickly and effectively. There also is, quite frankly, as you would have noted, certain realities in terms of right now, where you have somebody overseeing IT, the day-to-day bylaw enforcement staff report directly into Mr. Smith, which takes him and his capacity away from being able to think longer and strategically about some of the planning that he needs to do for the entire corporate services department. You know, so, you know, we've already talked enough about the sustainability position, and I agree with the comments here. If, you know, if there hadn't been support, then we would need to revise the 80 by 50 and 50 by 30 and things like that. So I'm not going to get into that. I'm not sure I've covered off all of the areas, but really that's, you know, that's what it comes down to. I want both council and even the viewing public to understand that process that we go through. Every year, we look at and revise our 5-year staffing forecast. Each year, we bring forward as part of the budget the positions that we've agreed to in the 5-year staffing forecast. Each year during the budget, we can't bring forward to you as a council all of those positions that we know we definitively need because we still have to be responsible for the tax rate. So the key message I'm trying to leave with council is what you have before you relate to key fundamental priority needs that we see that are needed for a variety of reasons, whether that be mandatory certification, AMPS implementation and supervisory support, or inspecting properly our infrastructure as development goes in. So I don't think we've ever said, you know, that to council in terms of how we go through that process and what we do to get there. But I wanted to be able to demonstrate that even at a staff level, we try to be very responsible with reflecting on the fact that we may have higher order needs, but the reality is, you know, there's just so much in the way of tax rate and tax levy.
So, excuse me, when I'm looking at the positions, the fire training is a half-time increase. The revenue clerk is a third on the levy. And the manager bylaw is 100% levy. right? Okay, and the other two, the development engineering technician is funded through fees?
Yes.
And the sustainability is funded through the climate action. Did I hit everything correctly? Yes?
Just one further clarification. In the guidelines, the other two positions, the manager by law enforcement, and the revenue clerk impacts were offset by assessment growth. So we used assessment growth to fund the
Okay.
cost of those.
Okay. So really the positions are, there's a minimal levy from those 5 positions, 4.5 positions.
That's correct.
Okay. So just to be clear. Anything else for the good of the cause? We've got an hour left on our time clock if we want to take it. Would you like,
Yeah, maybe a break so we can recollect our
okay.
thoughts.
all right, why don't we come back at 3:15? Good suggestion. Okay. Okay, can I call the meeting back to order, please? I can use my gavel or I can whistle, and you might hope that I use the gavel. Council. Wait. Okay, thanks. We're back. I am going to start off by calling on Interim Director Fairweather to just clarify a number that was asked early on about the total tax burden. There was a difference in how the numbers were presented